Hello, everyone, and it's Tuesday, and Global Leaders Thrive Facebook page is live with some of the amazing brains in Australia. Suzette Bailey. Hello, Suzette. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you, Kerry?
I'm top of the morning here, and Ben Newsome is joining us as well. Ben, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. It's midweek and looking to get into it.
Yeah, and very green. You're looking very green there, very fresh and
rather green,
vitalised.
rather green
And
around the gills, perhaps.
and and welcome, Celia. Today, Celia and I are hosting a conversation around lead what matters, the human connection, and it's a very interesting topic today. We're talking all about artificial intelligence. And some of you might go, my heavens, what is this all about? How can you talk about artificial intelligence and humanity and all it brings? But I think part of the interesting thing in the time that we're living in, we need to be part of the conversation, and we need to, I believe, look outside our constructs, the way we think already, because we know we have been watching a fast, rapid, abrupt change happen across the globe with the pandemic. Even the aspect of where the vaccines are going at the current moment are absolutely amazing. So who better to have in the conversation, Celia, than Ben and Suzette? What do you reckon?
Very exciting, and it'll be interesting to see where we go, where we land at the other end.
It's always interesting, and that's part of this notion of continual learning. It's we can really test ourselves, and if we start to feel a bit uncomfortable, well, then it's a good sign probably that we're thinking about something new. So Ben, tell us a little bit about you. We'll let you go first because you're the green man in the corner.
Green for go, hey? Fair enough. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Newsome. I run two things. One is physics education, which for the past 17 years has done science outreach for schools right across Australia and all over the globe in all sorts of ways. I also run another company, which is a non-profit called Virtual Excursions Australia, where we help all sorts of museums, zoos and aquariums teach using conferencing technologies and best practices in that. But really looking forward to this particular chat. I've been hanging out with you in a few different ways around AI chats. It's really been interesting.
It has been. Thanks, Ben. Suzette, I know Canberra would be a beautiful spring morning.
It absolutely is. It's beautiful sunshine and predominantly blue sky. There's some clouds, but it's a lovely, nice spring morning. Not too hot, not too cold. I like this this part of the year, aside from the pollen. But I'm Suzette Bailey. I also have two companies. I've got a Century 7, which is my information management company that I've had for 22 years, working with very large organisations, including Australian federal government, in the area of sort of how people use information. But this year, I actually, as part of two other people, co-founded a AI startup around writing content using AI. So I've really gotten quite into the whole how AI impacts on our world, in our lives, and how we can use it effectively moving forward.
Oh, so interesting, because a lot of us are in adult learning. A lot of us are in our own businesses. A lot of us have a really strong memory of being educated and how education and business innovation all go together. So Celia, how are you doing today? A little bit about you and what you do.
Yes, I am in lovely Melbourne, which sounds similar to Canberra, with mostly blue. But we'll wait an hour or two and see what happens. So my world is around working with leaders with vision and helping them with the people issues and the humanity of leading. So I am really interested in the technology interface because it will change our world in ways that we don't necessarily know. And so it's really interesting to see what that might look like and what that might require of us going forward.
Well, folks, I'm Carrie Benedette, leadership coach, have a huge interest in emotional intelligence and how we use that for relational leadership. But I also am really enamored with the spaces we can create to think about our leadership and test our values and assumptions, and how we need to look at what tomorrow is bringing, which is already here, and how we can do that best. So part of leading is to keep an open mindset and to test out our theories. And for all you who are leading your own businesses, whether you're an entrepreneur or leading a small or a large business, or you're head of major organizations, AI is super topical. And every day we will see, whether it's any of our socials that we follow, any of the companies, the large research bodies that we follow, there is always something interesting around AI. And recently, Suzette put me onto an article just released by MIT, and all around language-based artificial intelligence, nearly said emotional intelligence, that's a faux pas, and how that's impacting on the type of language we can use AI for, say, time efficiencies and creativeness. So, I mean, Ben and Suzette, you're working with AI every day, and we are the beneficiaries of AI in our day-to-day life. Otherwise, we wouldn't be connecting like we are today. So we've just lost Celia for a little bit. She'll come back in, and that's part of the technology. Let's just talk a little bit about something that's a bit unusual about ourselves. We've said about our businesses, a little bit unusual, but I think part of the unusualness is that we're in the throes of becoming. We're changing, evolving all the time. And I think that's quite a nice segue into AI and what we're doing. So something crazy about you, Ben. What is there? Something unusual?
Oh, crazy. I blow stuff up for a living. And those people wondering, oh, seriously? Yeah, I run a science company. So yeah, we do. We do that and make kids look at the wonder of how the world works. So done in a controlled way. So that's a crazy thing. But I was actually just reflecting on what you were saying there, that we do use AI every day. And without any preparation whatsoever for this particular chat, I was honestly dealing with some captioning, honestly, of some videos we've got. And honestly, It's so much easier to deal with AI, get the bulk of the work done, then I can refine it. It saves a lot of time. There are so many different software around. And I know, Suzette, you are definitely the person to know about the different bells and whistles around software around this. But yeah, that's something crazy I do.
Come on, Suzette. Can't let him get away with being the most crazy out of all of us with blowing things up.
I don't know about that. Crazy for me? Well, I originally was also, ironically enough, in the science world, because my original degree is in genetics and biochemistry. So it's hilarious about the fact that I started with information encoded on biological material, i.e. us, and I'm now doing that in the digital world with AI. But the other sort of probably the crazy thing, and a lot of people don't know about me, is that I'm an absolute sci-fi nut. And I've actually been on 3 Star Trek cruises, and I'm absolutely devastated about the fact that I can't go on next year's.
Oh, so I've just got a thought. You should, with all your clients, you should have a Star Trek virtual Christmas.
Oh, that could be, yeah.
Oh, wow. Could you imagine what you would do with that? That's amazing. Yes, I'm just going to plot that. I'm just going to drop it. I think, it's part of the ideas thing. Something crazy about me. I don't know how crazy I am. I just know that I could, if you put the right music on, I can dance anytime, anywhere. So part of that is keeping up steps. I don't know if that's crazy, but, anyone I talk to at the moment, when I say to them, do you want to go dancing? And they just go, oh, remember when we danced all night? We could go somewhere, we could dance all night. I mean, well, what's stopping us now? So maybe that's it. But anyway, let's talk about AI, and let's talk about whether it's going to affect the human connections that we have, or will it improve? So I'm going to put it out there, big, wide question. Nothing too astonishing here. We can go in any way we like. So, initial thoughts.
for me, that one that comes to it is there's a couple of facets around that. AI, probably taking a step back, and just for people who aren't familiar with what artificial intelligence, a lot of artificial intelligence in different aspects of it works and operates similar to us as humans. So, but at the same time, it can still be very much a processing and consistent. So it's really good, as you mentioned before, I think, Ben, about doing the grunt work for things. So, whereas we're great for the finessing. So the emotional aspect, though, has come into play with things like, there's an AI one of the AIs that I work with, which actually understands language, and so it can write and at least mimic understanding human language. But what somebody did with that is actually created a service where you could have an emotional connection with this AI. You could actually use it as a support person, and have conversations with this AI to support you through an emotional time and that sort of thing, as opposed to going to like a human therapist as such. But it recently got shut down because it was almost too effective, and people were actually starting to develop relationships with these AIs, which and they had to balance it with the ethical aspects of this artificial crutch that these people were developing through this service.
Oh, that's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah. I often think of AI as what assisted technologies I have for my day-to-day living. And when Celia and I first talked about this, we said we really should have a conversation about whether the AI will destroy, say, possible jobs, whether it will replace a human, what it will actually do, in the future. And there's a lot of people who, depending on your view of the world at the moment, they'll go down a particular track. They totally believe that AI is something that should not be considered, shouldn't be used. But there are others who are going, oh my gosh, my head's just about exploding with the possibilities. And so part of being informed, I believe, is to actually seek out the discussion papers or the research projects or the results from things, and talk to people such as yourselves, because there are ways, as Ben says, where we can make some time, grab some time back, do some of the what I call the more mundane jobs, and get back some time. So they're the type of things I'm really interested in for, say, our large industries: policing, health, education, and where we've got huge workforces. Just for an example, huge workforces, time poor, and they're also frontliners. So I'm thinking, in an unusual situation like we're living in at the moment, AI could be of benefit to help us not have to do some of the managerial jobs or the administration jobs. So that's my thinking. I don't know, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a real chance about pattern recognition, for example. I mean, humans are only so good at processing so much information at a certain speed, some faster, some slower, but either way, we've got to go through that cognitive load to deal with this information that comes at us. But AI can deal with this at a much faster pace, and maybe occasionally might produce some weird results that are unexpected and potentially even wrong. But at the same point, as these things develop and advance, perhaps they can take that grunt work out of the equation. Then it's us to assess is this knowledge for real or not. But it may actually produce some real opportunities, because, I mean, Carrie, you sort of mentioned about the potential impacts on employment and how that might be as leaders of various organizations, how that sort of flows through. Well, I guess it's sort of knowing what these things can and can't do that will make the difference. And I feel that, fear usually comes from a lack of understanding. And once we understand what these things can or can't do, then we can deploy them in an efficient way, and hopefully a compassionate way that opens up opportunities. That's my thoughts at this point.
And some of the things with this is that the reality is, are some jobs going to go? Absolutely. There's no question about it. Are some jobs going to change? Definitely. I mean, if you take the AI side of it out of the equation and think of this as more as the next industrial revolution, it's the fourth industrial revolution. You look at all the three past ones, that same thing, regardless of what technology was driving the industrial revolution, jobs were lost because of efficiencies and gain. Jobs were changed. But conversely, so were jobs created as well. So that in this case of the AI, as Ben very rightly said, this is just another, as humans, we don't like change, and this is an industrial revolution, so it is a period of change. But you get situations like there's a supermarket in the UK, and the supermarket has this massive, it's like 3 football size warehouse where they actually don't have people packing groceries. They have robots, and they have these robots that run across this very vast thing, packing people's online online groceries that they've bought. But they have people actually helping to put perishables and things into these bags before they go out to people to get their groceries. And right next to them, they'll have a robot learning how to deal with these perishable items being put into these bags. And one of the journalist asked this person who, rightly so, this machine is being trained to replace the person it's sitting right next to. And they said, "Oh, you as an individual, how do you, as an employee, doesn't this scare you?" And the employee said, "Look, I've seen it work. It's going to be about 4 to 5 years before it's ready to do my job. And I'm training to be an engineer to be able to help," the sort of thing. So the person had changed their mindset from being a packer of, some groceries in a supermarket to actually working for the supermarket as an engineer in the same business. And they were helping to train them. And that change in mindset, I think, is where a lot of people need to really get their heads around. It's not that their job is going to be replaced, is how can you now adapt your job to be able to be in the new economy?
Yeah.
And I think sorry.
Definitely, we're just thinking of adaptation. I mean, same thing happens with computer programming, right? Often the top jobs, the top software programmers may not have gone through college or university because, they just are really good coders and they build some really cool things. And eventually it's the skill set that's required, not the qualification. And so, I mean, that person who's packing the fruit and vegetables, what better person to know how to deal with a robot than the one who trained it in the first place? It makes sense.
Yeah, agree.
And I think one of the things that really sparked in my mind when Ben were talking is one of the real issues for workers today is around the cognitive load of workplaces. And I think there are some amazing opportunities to actually give us greater well-being in the workplace by having AI get involved in some of that organisation of information so that we're funneled down a point, which is, where some people's concerns lie around social media and things like that, where they're actually excluded information, but that information is purposeful in workplace settings where it's routine and there are things that we need to be able to do so that if, even just the email that I get that says, "These are the meetings you've got today and here are the documents I've found that might be of use to you," is awesome. I don't have to go looking. I just press the link. I think there's real opportunities around well-being of people in leadership roles as well. So flipping the mindset to also, yes, there's change coming, but this could actually mean a greater life for me rather than a lesser, more stressful life.
It just
sorry,
Suzette.
No, you go, Kerry.
It just made me think. We had Kate on a couple of weeks ago from Ernst. She's Director of People and Culture at Ernst & Young. And one of the things that's happened during the pandemic is Ernst & Young hasn't put any people off. They've been able to say, these are the areas where we need you. Let's have a look at your skill base. Where can you use what you've got, but also learn something new? So it's, in a way, it's a similar way. Here's a tool we can use. How can we use it to our best abilities? How can we actually provide you with more opportunity to do something else with you, to build on your skill set to the next. So that's how I tend to look at it. And someone might say, well, that you just really flipped it. That's a glass half full, not a glass half empty. And I think that's the way I like to look at it. Well, I'm very appreciative of what I can do on my little phone. I'm really appreciative of that. I actually would like some more around some time efficiencies for organisational work. So I've come out of education, you too, Ben, and I can see that there are some huge possibilities and opportunities right now for education alone. To take on some language-based AI, and we could talk to the cows come home, and there'll be a variety of opinions. And just recently, one of my sons, who's an assistant principal here in New South Wales, said, "Oh, Mum, how can you? No, Mum, you can't do that. You couldn't use AI for that purpose." And I just kept saying, well, tell me why. You haven't quite cracked it yet. Tell me why we can't. Why couldn't we do this? And what about this? And he's a great thinker. So I think eventually he will come around because I think for reporting, for programming, for communication purposes, we could actually use AI, the language-based AI that Suzette told us a little bit about earlier, to great advantage. But someone might say, you got pie in the sky thinking there, girl. That's not going to happen.
Pie in the sky thinking is actually what we need, because we don't make huge leaps forwards. I mean, we talked earlier, so you weren't on when we did, what we, Ben, Ben, that's right. I mentioned that I was a Star Trek nerd and nuts about sort of thing. But the reason why I bring it up now is, for me, Star Trek is also about that pushed a lot of the technology that was on Star Trek, even in the 60s, has now been proven to be actually, viable. And we're actually seeing it's real. And I think we need people to be thinking of what's possible. It may not be possible right now, but it's possible in the future. And one of the things I love about AI is it gives us the time to think, because the reality is more and more we are being forced to almost act like robots and digital, doing things robotically, because we do the same thing over and over and over again. If we can get that grunt work taken out of our jobs so that we can do the higher value, more finessing things that we are the geniuses at, it's going to be great. And that's where I think AI helps for the well-being side, as you were saying, Celia, because it gives us that time to think, to push the envelope, and to also look after ourselves as well.
And you just think about the sheer amount of knowledge that's sitting in any organization. I mean, Carrie, you just talked about education. The sheer amount of stuff that students produce, the staff produce, the parents produce. Think of that in any organization, any industry. There's so much stuff out there. Imagine just collating that and producing that in a way that's coherent to external people or people internal, depending on what you need to do. Someone has to do it currently. Well, is it current? You can probably argue, and in fact, I do know is that you could totally argue that there are ways around this. But there is an opportunity that potentially that's productive work that can actually go out and produce potentially income to bring in more people, not reduce your staff. I don't know. It's a bit of a question, and I suppose we'll see how that goes through different industry.
And I think there's a real value in what you're saying, is because currently, I certainly know in organisational life, we collect a lot of data and we often don't do anything with it. And that's a big bugbear, is don't ask me unless you're going to do something with this information. And I would see that this is an opportunity to turn data into information, into knowledge that then is fed back to you, that doesn't require 5 people to sit in a room and go through all of the spreadsheets for 10 days until we understand the insights from it. And so I think there's a greater, because I think the onus is on us, is when we collect data, is to use it. And I think that's a real opportunity to use technology to actually assist us to cut that process of using information that we collect to make it into useful information.
Yeah. And even being able to reuse and repurpose and renewing old content, that has been virtually or physically sitting on a shelf. Being able to, because ultimately the principles of things that have been done, I mean, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich as a principle is still completely valid now, even though it was written in, I think 1911. And so that sort of concept of being able to access greater repositories of data, information, but even knowledge, like actual knowledge of the and how it's been applied, but being to reduce the cognitive load on us as humans, but be able to improve the actual value of what comes out of the process of what we're doing, I think is critical, because otherwise we get stuck. I mean, how long does it take you to write a piece of content, and then versus actually polishing it and the value of it? You might spend 3/4 of the time writing that first draft, and then that last quarter. What about if the shift is the other way around? You have the AI in the case of data, doing that analysis for you in very quickly, and you spend the same amount of time actually analyzing the higher value content. Well, you're going to develop so much more valuable than you would otherwise.
I'm so pleased you just gave us that great example, the example of how we can use it, because I was thinking while I was sitting here, I thought, so if we said to people, look, this is how we could use it for, say, just say you're the principal of a school and you've got all these bits of information coming in from Department of Education or whoever it is, the system that you belong to. It reflects government policy, and it would reflect your registration as a school. It would affect the curriculum delivery, whatever. You've got to think about, right, well, how am I going to get this information out in a way that my staff are informed and it's clear communication, the message is clear? What about our students? It's affecting the students. So how can we make it the best way possible for them to understand it? And remember, all of us have different learning styles. We have different capacities depending on what our genetics are and our life experience, blah, blah, blah. And then we're thinking, well, we've got to get this information to the parent community. And so we've got a highly multicultural parent community. We've got, English as a second language is a major percentage of our community population. And then we've got some stakeholders. We may have a board that's involved. We've got the Parents and Friends Association, not just the usual parents or the PNC. So how could we use that AI and direct it out to, say, four major categories of recipients, and make sure that the message is clear, that it's understandable, and it's pitched at the right level. And that's clever leadership. That's clever leadership. But it also means that it could be huge. We could have 2 people, 3 people working on that. The leadership team might have to be pulled out of their classes, right? Use their time and to be actually writing this stuff where we could actually use the AI. So I'm really pleased that you've given us an example of how it could be effective. And I'm sure science teachers around the globe are using AI everywhere, and the kids just enthralled with their learning. So there's huge bonuses here.
Yeah, big data absolutely is the thing. And what you're describing is totally correct. I mean, eventually someone's got to consume this knowledge, right? So, as AI grows and gets better and better and better, it's going to be almost impossible to work out who wrote it, a human or this artificial intellect. Yet, eventually humans still need to be in charge of what is being put out there. And so either way, I mean, my argument is always have a human eventually at the end of it all, but it really is a lever, a force multiplier, if you will, on what we're going to produce anyway, but why not do it faster?
Force multiplier. That's brilliant. I love that.
I read a really interesting book many, many years ago called The Social Life of Information. And it talked about, it was this really interesting writer who then said, I'm going to go and apprentice myself to the youth to find out what I don't know about gaming and, all of the sort of emerging technologies. And one of his things is that there always has to be that socialization piece of any information or an output of a knowledge base or in this circumstance, AI. And I think that's where, for me, that's where the mindset piece of leaders is important, is that their role is actually helping people interface with this kind of information and knowledge and turn it into something that then is a knowledge worker, piece of output or something like that, rather than trying to focus on keeping people safe and telling them that their jobs won't change and all of those sort of leadership activities, is to actually help them work out how do I apply the social aspect of information and knowledge so it turns it into wisdom and then can be used further and make those decisions that you're talking about, Ben.
And this is the thing. I mean, ultimately, when all said and done, AI is still a tool. It's the same as a hammer versus a nail gun, but one does it faster, and it's ultimately, but they still do, they still push a nail into a piece of wood. I mean, you could bash it with a piece of, with a rock. It's the same. Ultimately, it's still the same principle, but one does it better than the other. AI does things better, but it's still a tool, and like anything, it needs to be used well and that sort of thing. And ultimately, as us humans, we're good at the finessing and that sort of thing, but we're not. Even when you were saying things like you were saying earlier around Kerry, around how we. All of this, sort of being able to repurpose this content and being able to that side of it, and people being able to have the time. And well, think about it from this perspective. We're still human, and as humans, we make mistakes all the time. Even if we are, there's a LinkedIn, for instance. There are 11 million profiles on LinkedIn that has manager spelt as major, and the reason why that happens is because we don't have enough time, and we don't see the forest for the trees when we do our reviews of our own content, and we don't have the time to let it sit these days and come back to it later, or we just don't even think about it. Yeah. And so, currently there are 11 million majors around as opposed to managers around this world, 300,000 in Australia alone. And, we laugh at this, but this is true. I mean, it's sort of like, it is a fact.
It's only Christmas.
Well, that's exactly. This was actually done a few months ago, so it wasn't even Christmas related. So that I could understand. But it's a fact of the life of that we, as Ben mentioned earlier, we live with so much information. I think something like the world's population of content and knowledge is doubled, I think, every 10 or 12 hours now. With data and all that included, we physically cannot, that cognizant load is huge. So technologies like AI are critical in being a tool to help us to navigate these things. How we use them, though, is still up to us. And ultimately, we still have to choose if we're going to use it positively, negatively, ethically, all of these things, that the same things as bringing on a human staff member. You have to, this tool or any other tool, you've got to assess the same, using the same criteria.
Yeah, I think about, this is the same arguments came up with the World Wide Web in some ways when it first turned up. It displaced some industries. God, imagine being involved in the encyclopedia business before World Wide Web turned up. And yet we now have access on our phones, like the links to pretty much the sum of all knowledge, more or less. If it's not gatekeepered, we can reach it. And now the challenge is now actually disseminating that or distilling it into some sort of coherent piece that you can actually use. And just going, Suzette, with those numbers, we were talking, when you hear about all the pandemic curves and how it goes up, that's crazy. Every 12 hours, that is some really incredible, growth. So, what do you do with that? And also, more importantly, if you've got all the data, what's real, what's not, and what's rubbish? And it's sort of being able to work with that is really important. I think AI is really going to be very powerful, and more importantly, know how to use the tools.
So we're really talking about the social and emotional connections we all make as humans, and that if we look at AI as a tool, it's actually going to give us more time for those social and emotional connections. Dare I make a jump there, which is into the ether, into the black hole, I suppose. But it could very well mean that we're not as perhaps seduced by the AI and the fastness of everything, but we could actually put it down and go, my social and emotional connections with people, my relationships, which go to leadership, how we lead our businesses, ourselves, our organisations, is going to benefit from that. And that seems to be all the research. You know, you look at anything that Forbes is putting out at the moment, McKinsey, anything, where they're all looking at and saying, we will need to still be for 2030, we still need to have a mindset of being the explorer, you know, of being able to host, being a translator of communication, right? So, and I love those terms because they actually add some challenge, they add some excitement, some wonder in the exploration, that notion of not quite sure where it might take me. Will I trust this and go a bit further? So if I can be more efficient in the communication and the data that I get in to help me look at the organisation I'm in or my business or, you know, whatever it is that I'm selling, well then my human side's only going to benefit. So, I mean, you know, somebody's already going, my God, that woman is crazy. That woman is crazy in thinking that way. But I like to say there's a whole range of opinion about this and possibility, and that's why we have innovation. That's why that notion of scenarios. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? What can we do? Looking at how we can harness the tools for the best way forward, not dare I say, evil or persecuting or disadvantaging others, but for the good of others.
I think of, you mentioned briefly about language. I mean, imagine being able to deal with, there are thousands of languages around, being able to actually work in all sorts of cultural contexts, different languages in different ways in what you do in your organisation. What a tremendous opportunity. Seriously, that's huge. Yeah. And then you kind of think about also connecting with people that might have hearing impairment or whatever it is they have. There are different ways to be able to make things happen, and AI can really help power it. I think it's an opportunity.
The question
can also be
a... Oh, sorry. You go, Suzette.
I was just going to say, it can be absolutely open up communication. It can also stifle communication, because then this is where the intentional aspect of ethical AI has to come into it, because they've also shown that when people train AI, if they're not intentionally looking for diversification, you actually can have what's called unconscious bias come into AI. And what that means intentionally is that things like some of the music systems, when some of them were first released, they biased towards white male singers, because the actual people who were doing the programming listened to white male singers in this particular case. And so what happened was that they would do all their testing on white male singers. So over time, the AI went, oh, that's obviously what everybody wants. And so it started to then serve that up to everybody. And so you then have none of the female or other ethnic groups represented in the actual selections when they first went in. So part of this is also about making sure that when you use these kind of things, that you are aware of intentionally using it positively. And even that, what does positive mean? It's understanding what the potential implications are of what you're doing, because you can have unintentional consequences, the same as you can with humans.
And yeah, that's absolutely where I was my mind had turned to. So what is it that we almost need to bring our humanness to the decision making about how we apply it? And be, because you can think about, my mind's going straight to things like genetically altered seeds and things like that, the unintended consequences, and is it evil, or is it, and it's money is the answer. And you can take an absolutist position, but that means you miss a whole lot of in between. And so there's this kind of, the piece that we need to work through is the grey of it, and what are the principles that guide us in our decision making around how we use this and how we build it also, by the sounds of it.
Most definitely. I mean, ethical AI you could go and do a search on it. It's actually quite topical at the moment. Yeah. But ultimately, from my perspective, ethical AI really isn't ethical AI. To me, it's just ethics. represented in AI. And ultimately, whatever the ethics that you subscribe to, because fortunately or unfortunately, I think it's a positive and a negative in itself. We all have different levels of ethics, and what constitutes. It's this whole for some people who didn't know, Google used to have its tagline, do no evil. And so, but what does that mean? Like, even sort of what do no harm, came from the whole do no harm from Isaac Asimov. But what does that mean in context? Because what harms me may not harm you, or vice versa. And so when you're dealing with AI, it's the same ethical conundrums that we have as humans, represented and exacerbated, because it tends to do things much faster. Of course, that's the reason why AI is really great in the AI. And we see essentially the issues that we're seeing in AI are really just a reflection of us that we have in our own culture and our own society.
Yes, yeah. And there's no clear path. We have to work our way through it in conversation. Yes. Oh, you're on mute, Carrie.
I typed, be part of the conversation. And I think that's why our intent here today was to talk about the human connection and leading what matters. So our humanness is still what matters. As far as I know, we are here, and we're, the pandemic's having a crack, but we're still here and evolving. There's babies being born every minute of every day across the globe, and they will be our population for the future. So they're going to be in a world that's quite different to ours. So I think being part of the conversation is the best part of it all. We've got to keep it. So why not have the best people in the room to have a chat about it? So any last thoughts, Ben? As we
look, I think it is a brave new world, but it's also, these thoughts have been around for generations. How do we act and operate in our own businesses, and how do we act as human beings that look after each other? So if we think about AI in that context, how can AI look after your organization, your people, and your customers and whoever else that you're dealing with? I feel that that's really the lens to be looking through. And the do no harm thing is very challenging, true. And so maybe softly, but go forth rather than stay stagnant.
Nice. Any last thoughts, Suzette?
And look, I reiterate everything Ben has said is absolutely exactly what I think too. And I think for me, the only way to deal with this is don't stick your head in the sand. Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, this is happening. I mean, we are already surrounded by AI. It's not something that's coming. It's something that's already here. It's already impacting. If you mentioned using your phone, Kerry, well, Siri, if you have Netflix, all of those sort of things, Google, they all use AI. It's a part of our life, and I think it's being intentional and being educated about how you want to use this, and ultimately being part of the conversation means that you actually have an ability to direct it and how you use it in your life, to an extent, of course, like anything. But sticking your head in the sand, I think, like anything, doesn't really affect any. It will happen to you as opposed to you being part of the conversation.
Yeah, agreed.
And my takeaway is to go off and read more science fiction, so I know what the future is going to be.
I love that one.
Of course. So I can just see a whole series just being developed just by the four here, and whoever we're going to co-opt. All about it. A new series, a new science fiction series, Celia. Well, a great conversation today. And totally enjoyed having some expertise in the house, in the studio, in the hub, whatever it is. But the conversations are what matters, and leading in our time and for the future is crucial. We have some tools at our beck and call. We need to be part of the conversation in how we use those tools for the benefit of humanity. So with thanks for the conversation today, hoping that the rest of the week goes as well as possible. And listeners, don't forget, we would love your comments. This will be also used as video as well. So It's on Facebook as well as YouTube and Twitter. So that's the great thing. We're utilising some of the AI as we go, but do be part of the conversation. Leading what matters. The human connection is all about people, and we are precious. You need to thrive and go gently in all the rest of the things you do this week. So thanks, Celia, for co-hosting with me today. Thanks, Ben and Suzette. And talk to you again. Bye for now.